The Talmud tells the story of a Roman emperor who was killing off the Jews. Before sending a sage to the executioner, the emperor called him in for questioning. "I don't understand how you Jews can believe that the dead will be resurrected." The sage's youngest daughter answered for him. She told the Roman, "Before, you didn't exist, but now you do. That doesn't surprise you, but I find it amazing, and I always will. Today, you exist, and you are amazed that one day you may exist again. That doesn't surprise me a bit."
The Talmud includes vivid descriptions of the resurrection of the dead, but its own existence is proof of resurrection. It has survived every attempt to destroy it. And again, despite the scope of the disaster, the people survived, and with them, their book.
As the Talmud says, we learn more from the dead than from the living, because the living convey the teachings of the dead, and in doing so, bring them back to life. In Hebrew, a cemetery is called Beth HaHaim, the home of the living.
Although in appearance, Europe's Talmudic history lies in the past, the tombs, like open books, like tables of the law stuck in the ground, still bear witness to the wisdom of the ancients. But intelligence lives on. It is still there, ready to be born again, even on other continents. After the war, Talmudic scholarship would again flourish, especially in the United States, thanks to the Daf Hayomi program. If one reads one page per day, it takes a little longer than 7 years to read the 2,711 pages of the modern edition of the Talmud. This is the discipline now followed by all the world's Talmudists worthy of the name as part of the Daf Hayomi program, that is, 1 page a day. Rabbi Meir Shapiro of Lublin in Poland initiated the practice of reading 1 page of the Talmud per day on September 11th, 1923, Rosh Hashanah. He interpreted the Talmud as a spiritual home where all Jews could dwell together at the same time throughout the world by studying the same text. In 2005, over 46,000 people gathered at Madison Square Garden in New York, connected by satellite to other Jewish communities in the world, to celebrate the 11th completion of the study of the Talmud, 11 7.5-year cycles. A new type of Talmud scholar is beginning to rise, resuming the ancestral ways. Meanwhile, high in Manhattan skyscrapers, businessmen, lawyers, and bankers are choosing to devote themselves to a daily Talmud reading before returning to the office. The exercise is a source of energy for them.
He's going to cover that eventuality if he doesn't die. So he's going to play it safe to be told with a knife.
Talmudic wisdom is capable of providing answers to dilemmas raised by modern times.
Commitment and verbalizing the remorse and the future.
Isn't it said that God made the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, when today the whole of mankind works for 6 days and rests on the 7th? Is that not a sign of Torah's timelessness? Asked the Talmud.
From the very beginning, American Jews took an active part in constructing the new world. At times, they paid the price of assimilation and lost their Jewish identity. Nevertheless, they've always maintained their ties to their ancestral lands, returning to Europe regularly. Nostalgia was not the only factor. They were also driven by a real need to meet those who managed to preserve the Talmud from assimilation. Of course, assimilation had been a problem in Europe. Scholars left the yeshiva for secular studies, yielding to the temptations of philosophy, literature, art, and science. Many of the children and grandchildren of Talmudists pioneered discoveries in fields unrelated to Judaism: mathematics, logic, physics, and even psychoanalysis. Writing to Carl Abraham, Sigmund Freud mentions Talmudic atavism, which probably gave many of their colleagues a taste for psychoanalytic theory.
What's the difference between a Talmudist and a psychoanalyst? One generation, they used to say. Today we can reverse the question, what's the difference between a psychoanalyst and a Talmudist? Another generation.
And yet, that was the generation who had had the Talmud torn from its hands and thrown into the fire. Once you start burning books, you are on the way to burning people. People were put into trains that became their graves. But trains can be put to much better uses. One of the carriages in this train becomes a Talmudic academy every morning during the ride from Long Island to Manhattan, where the commuter students no doubt include many children of Shoah survivors. The Talmud stimulates the intellect. It inspired the study of law, trade, psychoanalysis, and many other fields of knowledge. Apparently, it has something for everyone.
We have the assumption that there's at least a possibility of tahora. In other words, if a woman had a cesarean section and she didn't bleed, she would be tahora. If she was walking around, then we wouldn't consider, right, we wouldn't consider that a problem.
How do we know that woman inspires man? From what is said, God said to Abraham, "Listen to your wife, Sarah." From this, the wise men deduced that if women were to study, they could go much further than men. Is that why he dispensed her from studying?
Right, that this woman is about to give birth.
Modern times will have brought the Talmud more students. Jewish women, who had always been held at some distance from the Talmud, are now applying their minds to study. Every day, more women enroll. Their elders were satisfied with hearing about it from men. All Jews have Talmudic scholars among their ancestors. Freud mentions the Talmud of his fathers. Karl Marx came from a line of over 14 generations of distinguished Talmudists. Einstein parodied the Talmud inadvertently by discovering the laws of relativity. Kafka regretted not having studied it. It's impossible to count the founders of modern thought who owe the Talmud something in some way. Even if the Talmudic tradition has been abandoned at times, denied, or banished, the Talmudic process has continued to unroll. In New York, Art Scroll editions are tirelessly translating. Rabbi Sherman is among the artisans who have lent their translation skills to the latest reinvention of the Talmud. Today, there are English, Russian, French, and Spanish versions of the Talmud. As if the latest phase in the book's evolution was its accessibility to all, even those who have never learned Hebrew or Aramaic. This is the goal that Adin Steinsaltz, founder of the Israel Institute for Talmudic Publications in Jerusalem, set for himself. He is the author of a new, annotated translation, the purpose of which is to point out the relevance of the Talmud today, enlighten the greatest number. To achieve this goal, the Talmud is using new paths